Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're here a little bit earlier. We should have had this solved, but we're glad to be with you back here at Victory Baptist Church. And this presentation we're going to show you and talk through today with you is not something we've ever done before, except last night, okay? And so if we have a couple hiccups or hesitations, this will be just normal for us. And I think I can run the clicker in the right way here. So the theme of our presentation this morning is partnerships in missions. Historically, many missionaries that went out, picture for instance Hudson Taylor going into China, where he really had no teammates, just him and his family, or Adniram Judson, some really pioneer missionaries. There wasn't anybody to partner with when they went there. That has changed drastically in the last 100 years or so. And most places that we have gone as missionaries, there have been believers there already. There have been churches there. There are actually, where we served in Ukraine and Russia, there were Baptist churches there. And so we didn't go there to reinvent the wheel. We went there to form partnerships, to help them mostly with theological education and other things that they needed, assistance in building church buildings, things like that. And so just most everything that happens today, it's my theory, the best way to do it is through a partnership instead of a missionary and his wife and kids with pith helmets, making a path through the jungle. And so that will be our theme, and kind of have, we would say, our mission statement, how we have operated through the years. And I'll have to turn this way to read that. For the last 25 years, we've worked at building partnerships for the purpose of seeing people come to Christ, be discipled, be added to a Bible-believing church, be trained, and be sent out to repeat the same process in another location. And we've had the opportunity to do that in several locations that we're going to share with you. The biblical basis for that would be found in the book of Philippians. In chapter 1, Paul writes, and he thanks the Philippian church for their participation. It could be translated their partnership. Sometimes it's translated fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now. And the Philippian church, just to give you a little bit of background, Paul and Silas were not able to spend a lot of time there. Remember, they got put in prison, and then they were thrown out of town. They went to Thyatira, and they were there less than 3 weeks, I think 2 Sabbath days is the way it's put in the book of Acts, and they were run out of town there. And so it's interesting how the Philippian church and the church from, not Thyatira, but Thessalonica, they picked up and they began spreading the gospel. In fact, he says to the Thessalonians, from you sounded out the word of God throughout all Macedonia and Achaia. And so Paul viewed these churches, these people that came to Christ, as partners in ministry. Also, of course, when Paul wrote Philippians, he was in prison. It's a prison epistle. And the church in Philippi sent Epaphroditus down there to minister to the Apostle Paul, to take money there, to meet his needs. And so this concept of partnership is biblical. It's not new. It happened in the New Testament. We had the opportunity to spend our first years as foreign missionaries in Ukraine. And we were in northeastern Ukraine in the city of Kharkov. And there we partnered with several Baptist churches. I believe now this city was 1.5 million people, okay? So it was a good sized city. But within the city or in the villages around Kharkov, there were 11 Baptist churches. And so in all those churches, it was interesting that most of the men were expected to preach at some point during a given month. And so there were people who preached, they just didn't know how, most of them, all right? And we were able to help to start a Bible Institute program there locally and one nationally in the country of Ukraine with our team. And we were able to help them to understand how to properly study the Word of God, give them tools to use. And it was pretty amazing. The first church service I was in Ukraine, 3 guys preached. All of their text was John 3:16, and they all said the same thing. And they really didn't explain the verse, all right? They just kind of rambled on for a while. And it was neat to see when people are taught to study the Bible properly and how to put that into sermon form, how that changed over the course of those 6 years. It was just amazing. Revival was sweeping across Ukraine. The Ukrainians just grabbed the concept of church planting and went with it. And by the time we left Ukraine, the church we worked with, it started a daughter church and a granddaughter church out of that first church plant. And so it was something like we'd never seen before. Just amazing. After 6 years in Ukraine, we had always wanted to minister in the country of Russia, and we felt that's where God was leading us. They talked us into spending our first term and a half in Ukraine. They said, help us get started in Ukraine, and we'll see about Russia. After 2.5 years, we got an email that said, the board has approved you going into Russia and coming back with a recommendation of where we should open up Russia first, where we should start. So Donna and I made a couple of trips up there. We ended up in the city of, it looks like Perm, like a permanent, or permafrost is spelled the same way in English, but it's pronounced Perm, okay? And that's a city of 1 million people. And we actually were recommended to go there by both the British and American consulate in another city called Yekaterinburg that we visited in our first trip into Russia. We presented ourselves as economic development people, trying to help the people, and they said the laws are better in Perm. And so that particular province would be, or oblast they call it, would be better to go to. And so when we were given the go ahead to do research in Russia and figure out where we would like to recommend the mission open Russia first, Donna and I we're actually home. We just buried her father, and they said, go wherever you want to go, come back to a recommendation, and we'll put together some people and see if that's where God leads us as a mission to send you. And so we did that, and the first city we went to was Perm. And on a Friday, we were being shown around the whole province by an unsaved tour guide, and who was the one who issued our first visa. And interestingly, for the rest of our time in Russia, we got our visas through that man. He had a travel company. He actually umbrellaed our whole team, brought them in, as we added 2 other families as time passed. But it was crazy. We told him we'd like to contact some of the Baptists, and so he said, one day, he said, on a Friday, we asked him what was next. He said, we're going to find the Baptists today. So he took us out to his church. It had been the first Baptist church in the city of Perm. It was about 90 years old at that time. And we just started looking around the property, and there was a lady who was a caretaker. She came out and she said, well, we're having prayer meeting tonight. Why don't you come back? And so we did. We met the pastor. He invited me to preach the next Sunday. We invited a couple of other important Baptists from the province there to come together, and I preached, and we ended up, within a week, we ended up just meeting with them in a hotel, I guess you would say business conference room, and presenting what we did as a mission, what we would like to do. Were they interested? They said yes. We put a team together from the mission to go back and meet with them again. Donna and I moved there a couple months later, and excuse me, when you get old, you get emotional. You know, anybody else have that problem? But those were the best 10 years of ministry of our lives. It was just amazing. Several new churches were started. We helped them start their own home mission agencies. We challenged them to get involved in not only providing people, but providing money for church planting efforts. We made an offer for every ruble they gave, we would give two from our funds. And the last year that we were there, those churches gave the equivalent of $10,000 for local church planting in that area. Russians want to be independent. They don't want to be under somebody else's thumb. So it happened easy there. And multiple churches were started, and there was a lot of church growth in that region. So it was just a really good time there. I wish we could tell you stories more, but we're going to have to move on. We put this slide in here partially because Donna wanted it there, and partially because Bill Mountain went there a few years ago. And this is part of the group of individuals that we served there and worked together in that church. We saw that church start doing satellite ministries out. And the pastor from that church, he's in the back left there with a little girl on his back. His name is Pavel, or Pasha, we called him. And Pasha and I handled all of the institute classes for the two most northern cities in the Perm province. And so we had 5 different local church-based Bible institutes around what would be about the size of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's sitting horizontal, the Perm province is up and down. And so we did a lot of north to south travel there, but Don and I moved up into the city of Solikamsk, and we're part of that church. Really dear people there. We did some unique things. We'd sometimes do outings in a snowstorm and actually study the Word of God together up on a cliff in a snowstorm. We would sometimes visit one of those little satellite churches. So one of them we went to, Donna took her ventriloquist doll and shared a little bit there. Donna, do you want to talk a little bit about that experience and why that was unique in Russia?
I really enjoyed working with puppets. So I thought, well, maybe they haven't seen something like this. So we took this puppet out there, and they were surprised that it was me. They thought it was a tape inside that puppet that's talking. You know, they couldn't be as bad Russian as I used when I spoke Russian with that puppet. It's really interesting to speak Russian with a puppet when you're used to doing English without moving your lips. But it became something that was very interesting to them, and I also used other puppets in the area, and they latched onto it and they enjoyed those puppets. After that, go ahead.
Okay. We had small group ministries. We were one of the small group leaders there, and so we piled that many people in a 10 by 14 living room. And have a meal afterwards and that kind of thing. It was a church that grew while we were there, but most of all, men were trained. They have a principle there for men in a local church. If you're there, you can stand up, open a Bible, and say something. You get trained to preach, and you do. And so much of my ministry there, toward the end of how long were we there, Donna? Do you remember how long we were in Solikamsk? I've forgotten.
3 years.
3 years. Toward the end of that 3 years, it would be sort of like this. Somebody would call me and say, "Hey, this is Yuri. I got to preach tomorrow. Can you come on over?" And I would go over there, and he'd show me his outline. He would run through a rough sketch of it, and I would make suggestions to him. And you have to understand that Yuri was an alcoholic, and was just basically spaced out on alcohol for much of his life. Came to Christ, and God turned him around. And he learned to preach and do it coherently and do not too bad of a job. And so that's a lot of what we did in Russia. And we did have leadership training ministry on float trips. We had these 4 or 5 catamarans. Sometimes we would take up to 24 people at a time on 6 to 8 day river trips, and I wrote a different leadership course every year for 7 years that we were there, and it was mostly pastors and people who were heavily involved in local churches. We'd be there sometimes husband and wife together, and God used those things in that region more to equip people for ministry than anything else that we did, even the official Bible Institute program that we did.
Leon, just a minute, I would like, yeah.
Go ahead.
With those catamarans, Leon was there for about 6 months, and he traveled around the area with his head pastor, and he came back to the apartment and said, Donna, it's going to take us 10 years to get anything going here. And we're like, oh boy, we got to do something for the guys, because there's nothing for the guys. And so he came up with this idea of, there's lots of rivers here, let's see if we can do a float trip. And that ministry took off, and it was really the cause of explosion of what we were able to do there. God just used that. It was within 18 months that we had a Bible Institute going there, because of this thing that the Russians just love to get out there in the woods and swat mosquitoes, and they just love it. And so we hit up, the Lord directed us to use that.
So that was a really good ministry for us there. When we left that region, they started buying their own catamarans. I think there were 15, and I think we bought 5 of them before we left there. After returning to the United States after 10 years in Russia, we got involved in Native American ministries in Oklahoma, and we partnered with this ministry that was already there. It was really a nice little campus. We didn't put it here, but they had dormitories, kitchen, cafeteria, you name it. They were set up to bring in students from all over Oklahoma and Texas and Louisiana and so on, and do week-long Bible Institute courses there. There were a few resident students, and over the course of 5 years, we traveled there often and taught in that Bible Institute, and God bless that.
So we had to learn a little bit about Native Americans and what had to learn that history. So that was a challenge for both of us.
Do you know there were 5 trails of tears for different tribes that were sent to Indian Territory, to Oklahoma? Really sad history, and those people remember it. and so it's very difficult, slow-going ministry, but it's still ongoing there. Excuse me. I have a map of Alaska in front of you. Alaska is the biggest state in the...
Leon, let's let leave our... I call my grandson by my oldest son's name. His name is Kai. I've called him Levi several times. He says, my name is Kai, Grandma. Okay, Kai has a few things he'd like to say about Alaska. You want to stand right up here, honey? Okay, can you turn around this way? Can you tell us about Alaska?
Did the mic get turned off?
I can talk loud, but I don't know if you use the direction.
Try it again.
Okay. Let's get started. Although Anchorage is the largest city, Juneau is the capital of Alaska. Alaska is the largest state in America.
What's the biggest mountain?
Denali.
And what kind of bears do they have there?
Alaska is the only state that has 3 bears.
Okay, tell us what they are.
The polar bear, the black bear, and the grizzly.
What's the most interesting, what's the
moose.
Okay. And what's the most interesting animal that they have there? So this one right here.
The muskox.
Tell us about the muskox.
Okay, I'll start with how they protect their young. If there's a pack of Alaskan wolves around, then they form a circle around their young to protect them.
Can you tell us about their fur?
Their fur is the softest fur to make scarves with.
Thank you very much, Guy. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So we were located in the city of Anchorage most of the time, and Anchorage has half the population of Alaska. And so obviously it's a good place to do ministry there. But there's a lot of ministry that happens all over the state through various missions. Alaska is a breathtakingly beautiful state, and my wife became a much more proficient amateur photographer as we traveled around the state. Sometimes Donna would say to me, "Can we just go take pictures?" And we would do that in Anchorage, and we would do that on the Kenai Peninsula for half a day, or go up north and do that. And so we're going to share just a couple of those pictures with you. There's a very large lake on the Kenai Peninsula called Skilak Lake. It's a dangerous lake to boat on. Dozens of people have lost their lives there. If you fall into the water, you have about 3 minutes to live, because it's glacier fed. And this is the end of a fishing trip, my son and I, and the guy that's standing up driving the boat. I don't know why Alaskans stand up and drive a outboard motorboat, but that's the way they do it. I would think they would sit down and put on a life jacket, but anyway. Anyway, we caught so many fish that I couldn't hold a pole anymore, and this was a trip out, and that was actually a triple rainbow. One of them doesn't show up in that slide. This is 1:30 in the morning. Looking up, this is Sitting River toward Denali on your right, and there's a couple mountains to your left, Forker and Hunter. That's what it looks like at 1:30 in the morning in the summertime in Alaska.
How many miles away were you, Liam?
We were probably almost 200 miles away right there from those mountains. Up north, where our son was stationed in Glen Allen, Alaska, there's another range, and that is Mount Drum. It just looms out there. Donna took the picture from the middle of the road.
Okay, I took this picture. We were going with my son, and he's a state trooper. And I said, "Pull over, Levi, I got to get this picture." So he pulls over, and I jump out around the middle of the road. "Mom, you can't stand in the middle of the road. No, you can't do it." I said, "This is where you get the good picture, Levi. And so arrest your mother. I don't care."
So anyway, we had a lot of pictures taken in the middle of roads. Kind of as you go into the Kenai Peninsula towards Seward, you hang a right and go to the Kenai Peninsula. Farther down, there's a place called Turn Lake, and it's just gorgeous there. A lot of reflection pictures. You get these frosts that would come in around Anchorage before the ocean would freeze up. It would just coat every twig and every limb and every bud with like an inch of ice or frost that would stay there till the sun hit it for a while. And that's actually looking toward the downtown section of Anchorage from out on a peninsula. That's our street on a typical morning in the winter. You can see they have plowed a while before, but we got another 6 inches of snow. And it would be sometimes 3 days until they would plow our road again there in Anchorage. And so if you ever move to Anchorage, get yourself a 4-wheel drive, all right? There's various wildflowers, not the most famous up here. There would be fireweed that's there in the early summer, but a lot of beauty, and of course Summit Lake in the background.
I have pictures of fireweed out there. This is dandelion. Of course you know that. And so they have an abundance of them. And I said, you can eat dandelions here. So
Yeah.
it was beautiful.
So even though it's beautiful, there's a however here, right? The city of Anchorage often leads the nation per capita in murder, sexual assault, and vehicle theft. Just to give you an example, there are 10 cars stolen every night in Anchorage. Right? 10 cars stolen every night. And they just go into a chop shop, they're stripped, they're cut down to parts, and they're distributed out through illegal means, and you never see them again. That's it. There's a new mosque and a house of worship for every cult and ism that exists in the world, I think, in Anchorage. So there's just a lot of false religion there. But most people generally are resistant to the gospel, to religion in general, and they just want to be left alone. They just want to do their thing. When you get into the more of the backwoods places in Alaska, I was talking to a missionary from Anchor Point down on the end of the Kenai one time, and he says you can't do door-to-door evangelism or even hand out literature here, because sometimes someone will open a door and shoot a shotgun over your head. And so you just have to build relationships through the fire company or some other means. And so there are a lot of people, when we were there in the 80s, they told us about half the people in Alaska come to something, the other half are running from something. And so those that are running from something, like if you go to take a picture with them, they say, nope, no picture with me. It might be your guide on a fishing boat or something like that. There's no pictures taken. Don't want anybody to know where I'm at. And so that's kind of what you're up against. However, God shakes things up in Alaska fairly frequently. That was an earthquake that we had, 2 years ago, Donna? Donna will tell you about that.
Oh, did you have the next picture? Did that have a label to it?
It does.
There you go. In seconds, God can take away, or He can get your attention. That was quite a deal. So many people were frightened with that. That's the second largest earthquake that they've had since '64, when that shook for 4 minutes. This one shook differently, and it ruined a lot of buildings. A lot of schools were closed, and matter of fact, the school can't even be repaired. So kids had to get different places. We were at that time foster parents. Leon had just taken our children, 3 children, to be put on a bus, and he came back home, and the whole house is shaking. He walks in and it's shaking. He goes, Donna, what you doing? I said, Leon, it's an earthquake. Take cover. So he goes downstairs. I'm upstairs under the table, texting my son out in Kodiak, saying, you're going to have a tsunami. I just know it. And so he says to me, I thought you were dancing or something up there. I said, Leon, I don't shake the whole house like that. So that's the first time we were foster parents, and I thought, well, they got on the bus will bring them back. Well, that's wrong. You're supposed to go and pick the kids up, which I didn't know. So they were the last ones to leave the school, and the boy, Edwin, comes in the house and he says, wow, we just had an earthquake. What broke here? I said, your mirror, different things. So that was, and there's so many people that were afraid, and they were talking about it, and what an opportunity to say, God can change your life. And you never know when things are going to happen. It was a wonderful opportunity just to reach out and talk to them about their life, what they're looking for, and how things can change in just seconds.
All right. This picture I need to explain to you. The guy that was in that vehicle was a believer from up in the Palmer, Wasilla area, and he was just driving down the road, and something didn't.
It was dark.
It was dark, and it was early in the morning. And so he didn't, he felt like something was wrong, so he just put on the brakes and he stopped. And when he got out and looked around, that's where he was. If he had gone, just another few feet, he would have been into a chasm there and possibly lost his life. And so God really looked out for him. But it was, well, I'll tell you a story a little bit later here. We partnered there with Diamond Baptist Church, which has been one of our supporting churches as long as you have. It was one of the first places we went to raise support. We had spent some time in Alaska, had good connections there, spent several months one summer up there. I just went there working after we resigned from a pastorate. And that church was started by Baptist Mid-Mission missionaries, and actually a couple of them together, but the main church planners were Paul and Esther Weimer. I don't know if anybody knows them, but they both passed away a couple of years ago, 4 days apart. They were having a contest to see who could die first. Esther would say, I'm going first. And Paul said, no, it would be me, but I think that which one passed away first, Donna? she did. And but anyway, after actually Paul resigned from the mission and pastored that church for 20-some years afterwards. And the first pastor that they called when Paul resigned was Pastor Andy Fry, and of course his wife working with him. And he was there from that point until we moved there. And we actually went there to work with him in helping that church to become more multicultural and to help that church plant a daughter church. That was kind of our assignment. And so when we got there, actually Donna got there before I did. She flew, I drove. Okay. When we got there, he asked me a couple days later if I would go with him someplace. He had something to talk about, and we went to a Starbucks restaurant, and he said, I just want you to know in another month I'm going to be candidated in a church in Pennsylvania. All right. I just drove 4,500 miles from Pennsylvania. Donna was already there, and we went there specifically because we had Pastor Andy meet with our administrator who lives on the West Coast, and after meeting Pastor Andy, our administrator said, get to Anchorage as fast as you can. This guy's sharp, he's visionary, he's has the same philosophy that we do for church planting. And so this was kind of a shock to us. We went to work there specifically with this pastor in this church, partnering with this church, and he said that probably nothing will come of it, but the more we listened to them, we began to understand that her mother was blind, she needed care. His father had neuropathy in his legs, was losing his memory, and they needed to get someplace where they could minister but be connected with their parents at that point in their life. And so within, we got there in May. I was kind of late May. I would say within a month and a half, something like that, they were called to Pennsylvania. And
they were gone in August.
They were gone. Yeah,
And
everything changed. All right. So Pastor Andy had a son-in-law. That's his daughter there. All right. And Donna and I had been there and taught leadership courses different times when we were home on furlough. They would have us come up and teach a course there, helping to prepare new leadership for the church and for wherever God led people. And one of those was his son-in-law and daughter, Matt and Vashti Grimm. And they were in one of our classes back in 2013. And it was then that God began to kind of knock on their door and say, we want you in full-time service. And so it was interesting that when I was told that there's a possibility that Pastor Andy might be leaving, and I said, what about Matthew? What about Matt? And he said, well, it could be a seamless transition, but I can't suggest it. As his father-in-law, it just wouldn't be appropriate. And I said, well, I'll suggest it. And so from the time that Pastor Andy announced that he would be taking a church until the time that Pastor Matthew was installed as pastor was 3 months. And in that 3 months, after Pastor Andy left, I was pretty much in charge of who was going to be speaking, helping them with their sermons. We had different men that I was training to preach that would do Wednesday night messages and Sunday morning messages, and I filled in quite a bit. And so that's how we got through that transition until Pastor Matt, about the 1st of October, became voted in as the new pastor. He's added a couple of kids since we moved there, and they have 5. And the boy on the right was a foster child and adopted, and these kids are very special kids. Do you want to say something, Donna? Go ahead.
Oh, I always want to say something. I'm so excited about this thing. Little Lewis was a foster child, and this whole church is so outgoing for foster children that the pastor before that, Pastor Fry, actually ended up adopting 2 children at his age, because he has grown kids in college and beyond and married and everything. So there's many people in that church, many families that have foster children and have adopted foster children. And so this pastor is very special. He's almost like my son, because there was a lot of teasing going back and forth, because I was a church secretary. And so he's very special to me. I really love his family. His wife Vashti is a great gal, and she's a very godly woman.
So we participated in teaching in a lot of different settings. It's kind of the heading there in that slide. Donna's there addressing the ladies' meeting. I worked with a lot of men and training them to preach and that kind of thing. Did a lot of preaching for the first 3 months, and even after that, Pastor Matt was still taking seminary courses, and so I would preach frequently, either Sunday morning or Sunday evening. Ended up then teaching Sunday school classes pretty consistently until others were trained to take that over. We offered Bible Institute classes there, both leadership courses and how-to theology courses and that kind of thing, and often had like a dozen students in a Bible Institute class. But we became convinced, I'll make a summary of this, that the best way to train people for ministry is through individual mentoring. So we want to introduce you, besides to Pastor Matt, just some people that we were able to mentor. This is Nate and Hannah Bankston. They got married about halfway through our 4 years in Anchorage. Let me tell you about them. She is a sharp gal. She has a degree in music, sacred music and drama from Master's Seminary, which would be John MacArthur's school. And she is amazing as a choir director, and pretty much handled all the music that happened in the church, planned the Sunday morning things, whatever music, special music and things like that. Nathan, about 2 years ago, even though he's a young man, was installed as a deacon. He was on a 1-year kind of trial basis, and then voted back in as a deacon, and he was one of those that I trained to preach, and he's way better at it than I am at this point. Sometimes I can't remember what I wanted to say at my point in life, but this guy is sharp. You know, some pastor in the state would wake up sick, and they'd call Pastor Matt and say, "Can you send us anybody?" They'd send Nathan, and he'd get there, and they'd say, "Well, our Sunday school teacher's not here." He would cover it. And so very gifted young man. Both of them gifted musically, just amazing. Nathan worked with me. I had to work part-time in carpentry and remodeling in order to survive in Alaska financially, and Nathan worked with me many weeks, and he was just, you'd hand him a tool he never saw before. He would just take it and look at it. "Oh, I see how that works," and it would go to work. and so just an amazing young man with an amazing wife, and then their little boy. I can't wait to see, if I live long enough, to grow up and see him grow up and see what he turns into. Brian and Eunice Choi are second generation Chinese people. He's a dentist. Now, he looks like he's 12 years old, doesn't he? And he's a dentist working for an outfit called BTY Dental. You can do walk-ins for BTY Dental. They have 13 locations around Anchorage. You can just walk in and say, "I need something." They call a dentist over from someplace if he's free, and you get service. Pretty amazing business model. But his wife named Eunice has a master's degree in Asian language studies, and of course they're both fluent in, I believe, Cantonese. They grew up in Chinese homes, but English is now their first language. And so we were able to mentor them. I took them on one of my leadership trips down on the Kenai Peninsula for a weekend, and just the two of them, and spent 3 days with them. Came back, and we would go to their apartment one morning every week for a couple of years, and just do things with them, helping to train them for a leadership position in the church. And Brian's teaching Sunday school. Eunice has been involved in our ESL program and various things. This couple looks like characters, don't they? I mean, just a little bit different. Like they're not millennials; they're whatever's after that. Gen Xers or even after that. Josh, his grandfather was quite prominent as an evangelist in the southern states, the USA. His wife Anna is another one of Pastor Andy's daughters. All right? So we get two of Pastor Andy's daughters ended up back in the church there in Anchorage. Josh is a musician. He loves to play guitar. He wanted to start a praise band in Diamond Baptist Church. And first time he came in and sat up front and played a guitar, he had a wide brim leather hat. Probably that hat. And he had holes in his knees, in his jeans and stuff. You get the picture. He didn't quite fit the mold of Diamond Baptist Church, and didn't feel comfortable there. He wanted to be a worship leader in contemporary music, and so I think they tried 5 other churches in Anchorage, and then they came back and resigned themselves that proper theology and practice was more important than music. Amen. So anyway, for a while what's that?
He conformed.
Yeah, he conformed. We talked to him about, even we're talking about missions. They said, if you're going to go into missions, you got to be willing to adapt to that audience, and you could practice that here at Diamond Baptist Church. So anyway, I went and met with him in a restaurant one time and said, what do you want to be? His father-in-law was after me to, talk to him, so I did. And he said, I would like to start my own coffee shop. I said, do you have any money? And he said, no, but I think I have a partner. And that's what he wanted to do, is start his own. He wanted to go in competition and, have it like another Starbucks by his brand. But anyway, a while later, he called me up and he said, hey, I think I'd like to learn to preach. And so I met with him and helped him pick out the book of Philemon and took him through the steps in expository preaching, personal Bible study systematically. And Pastor Matt put him into doing Wednesday night services. And he did a great job through the book of Philemon. He wanted to be so desperately in ministry that he was always looking for, they were going to Hong Kong, they were going to England, they talked to everybody in ABWE. They had a new idea every week where they wanted to minister. One day, he called and he says, I'm applying for a youth pastor job up in Faith Baptist Church in Big Lake, Alaska. And he went up there and spoke a couple times to the young people. They called me up and said, we're considering hiring this guy as youth pastor. What can you tell us? And I said, well, ask him for a commitment. How long do you want him to stay? They said, well, we'd like him to stay at least 3 years. And I said, then ask him for a commitment, because if you don't, he'll have a new idea every week of someplace else in the world he wants to go. That's what they did, and they accepted him. They had a house, a paid position. He moved to Big Lake, Alaska, and they're in youth ministry there. And so he has since graduated from Baptist Bible College, some is distant learning, but he learned to preach at Diamond Baptist Church. Donna was a church secretary, appointed by Pastor Andy before he left. If you know Pastor Andy, you understand that's the way things got done at Diamond Baptist Church. While she was there were a bunch of little girls. They'd ride their bikes around, and they would come to the window and want to know if they'd come in. So Donna's going to tell you about them very quickly.
Yes, I will tell you. These kids would come to the door, knock on the window and say, hello, so I invited them in. So it was like a tour of the church. And they said, sure. So I toured them around, and then I said, give them a mint when they went out. So then they got on to coming to the door, knocking and asking if they could come in and get a mint. And I said, sure, if you want to listen to a Bible story. And so we did that. And the beginning of this, the church that we were working with was very white. They call it the white church. And so our goal was to make it more ethnically diverse. And so we're always looking for somebody. We're really thankful for the Chinese couple that came. And so these girls started coming, and I said, how about if you come to VBS? And so they started doing that, and then they came into Sunday school. I invited them. And as it turned out, the oldest girl there with this one over here, her name is Anna, And she and the girl with the pigtails ended up being two of our foster children. They have a brother named Edwin. And so we ended up having them because of a situation in their home, and that was a real story too. So since Leanne's telling stories, I'm going to tell one too. Okay. How do we get foster kids? These girls meant a lot to me, right? And so their mother had brought Anna into me and said, she's been abused. Can you do something about this? And so, well, we have a biblical counselor on staff here. So I went to the biblical counselor, and I joined in helping with that. And then the mother said, Donna, do you think you could listen to I don't even know what she said. I said, Karen, I'm always ready to listen to whatever you have to say. And she says, okay, so here's the number. And I'm like, a number? I didn't know. I didn't know what conference calls were. I didn't know what OCS was, Office of Children's Services. I didn't even know what that meant. So I went home. I said, boy, I better go with Lynn together to sit and listen to this. So I went home, said, Leanne, we have to call this number. So we called this number, and all of a sudden there's 14 people on this conference call with the, you can see they're tribal, they're Yupik, that's Eskimo. So we're listening in on this, and we all had to say who we are. Okay, so there's 14 people. People forgot who we were. We need to do something with these children because there's a problem in the home. And one person could take the boy, and the other one could take two girls up north, and they could take whatever. And I said, Leanne, do you think we could take these kids? No, we're too old. Okay. So we'll listen some more. And then I said, are you sure? He goes, so I listened to some more, and I said, we'll take them. And they're like, who's this? Who's this on the phone? And we ended up, who'd ever thought when you wake up in the morning, this is the emergency placement, that by that night you're putting to bed three kids. And the oldest was 11, and the boy was 11, and the little girl was 7. We got them in our home, and our goal was to get them back with their daddy, because their mother was the problem. And their dad felt sorry for them, so let the mom come back, and that's how they got in trouble. So we had these kids, and God just opened up that whole situation. That night they came to my house. I went to school to get them, and they said, well, Miss Donna, what are you here for? I said, well, I think I'm here so you can go home and see my house. Okay, so they came home, and no one's telling them anything. Their dad came over and put his arms around the kids, and I said, can somebody just be straight up here? And the OCS lady came, and she told them, and the boy just immediately went into tears and was bawling his head off, and it was really a hard situation, but it was Wednesday night, and we had Awana. And I got supper on, and I said, we're going to go to church tonight and have a youth group. And no, we're not going. No, in this home, we go to church on Wednesday night. And so they went, and that was a turning point for those kids. They got involved. People loved on those kids. They came home and sat around the table, started working on their booklet. We got them each a Bible, and the oldest girl got saved by Thanksgiving in the home. And it was just really amazing. And then their dad, you have a picture of their dad too? Oh, this is my Jasmine. She's the youngest one. And she is the sweetest little kid. And I just love her to death. Is there another picture of the next one? Okay, so Christmas came up, and we get some money to take them out to go shopping for dresses. They didn't even have any dresses. So I took her out shopping, and she said, I like that dress with the sparkle on it. So we went in the dressing room. She puts it on. She goes, Miss Donna, what does that say? And there I said, it says believe. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and thou shalt be saved. Acts 16:31. Everybody in the dressing room knew that. She's been to Awana. So that was her Christmas dress. And these kids, as you can tell, I miss them and I love them. And we really had a wonderful opportunity to reach out. And their daddy ended up coming to church. And he's been very faithful. You can go on about how faithful he has been, Leanne.
So yeah, they come Wednesday nights, they come Sundays, and if they're not out fishing someplace around the state. And so the two girls at different times trusted Christ as their Savior in our house, and then told us about it afterwards. It was kind of interesting. The oldest girl said, I don't think we're really saved. And the boy said, yes, we are. Dad said we were.
And wrote our names on a piece of paper. Remember that?
Yeah. And so Anna answered back, it doesn't have anything to do with Dad. This is personal between us and God. And within a few days, she just got, about like 11 o'clock at night, got down beside her bed and just prayed and asked Lord to save her. And Jasmine did a little after. So what a few minutes and friendship can do. Amen. So I want to take the gospel to every people, tongue, and nation, and I need to move on because we're out of time, but we started an ESL program. We had people from over a dozen countries come in, sit with us an hour and a half each week for several weeks in a row, and we were able to present the gospel to every one of those. And that's some of them, a lot of Hispanics, people, as we said, from all over the world. I'll tell you one story. This is Dawood. He's from Iran. And Dawood was one of these people that, really interesting, most people from Iran are Muslims, right? And but Dawood was a pantheist. He rejected Islam, and he kind of formed his self-styled pantheist religion. He said, I'm God, you're God, everybody's God. But he was divorced from his wife, and he said she was really bad. And I said, well, is she God? And he said, that stumped him for a while, but he said, I think sometimes, God can do bad things as well. That was kind of his philosophy. Well, anyway, whenever we had tried to just say anything about Christianity, the Bible, or something like that, he would just say this: I'm here to learn English. I'm not interested in religion. I want a friendship. I don't want Christianity. Well, he worked at the airport in food service. When that earthquake struck, they said everybody out of the building. He ran out of that building into the parking lot. 737s and 47s were sitting on the runway. The runway's going up and down, and those wings were doing this. And he called me and said, I want to talk to you. And I said, sure, come on over. It was just him and I in the house. We sat down and we had some lunch and talked, and he said he really moved to Alaska because he was a mountain climber and he wanted to climb Denali, and he said, what if I was climbing and that happened? I would have died. And I said, well, death is not really a problem if you're ready. And for the next half hour, he listened to me open up the scriptures and share the gospel completely with him, which is pretty amazing. After that, after he got over being scared, he never would let me do that again. But when we say sometimes God shakes people up, that's the kind of thing that happened with the earthquake. Donna, just very quickly, this lady, Miriam, is from Venezuela, and Donna was able to share the gospel with her repeatedly over weeks until she moved to Texas, pled with God to save this lady's soul, and she never trusted Christ that we know of, so you can pray for Miriam. We provided logistical support for other missionaries. The Clarks, very quickly, that's their family. Just the youngest daughter is still there, and she'll be leaving for college in the fall. They had a project. We're talking about partnerships and missions, right? They had a hangar project, nigh unto $200,000 project. How many churches and individuals would have to partner with them to build a $200,000 building? A lot, right? People sent work teams, churches sent work teams, individuals just took a lot of time off and came and helped construct that. We handled not only the Clark family when they traveled in and out through Anchorage. Kids are going to school, going back to the military, wherever. They stayed in our house. So we had a bed and breakfast for the Clark family. And also for probably 60 people that came through as work team members, we were able to help house them in our house and in the church. And so we partnered with other mission agencies to see things happen. I stuck this slide in here because Aaron Holtz his dad pastors a church up here in northern New York State someplace. Anybody know of them? All right, but anyway, they're potential teammates for the Clarks in Iliamna, Alaska. Just real quickly, it takes a whole family to send missionaries, right? Parents help by sending their children and grandchildren. Grown children partner by being supportive of absentee parents and their children as grandparents. Extended family provides logistical support for us through our care for our home and property. Some of you know Eric and Shauna Brooks. Eric is my nephew. They pastor down here in Colesville, is that right? And they took care of our property, mowed, It became a bed and breakfast, Airbnb, home away rental, and they cleaned and made beds and in between their ministries, and so it took a lot of people to keep we had enough income. We came within $1,000 of covering our taxes and their salary and everything else for 4 years. And so it takes a lot of people to send missionaries. Just real quickly, our family, Ryan Graston, pastors a church in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. Our daughter Holly, our oldest daughter, our second daughter Betsy handled all the bookings for us with our rental. Her husband Dan and their children, and of course our youngest daughter Lonnie is married to Andrew Curtis, and they have Kai who's with us and Darcy, and it takes a whole family to partner in missions. We also have Levi and Jessica Duell, who are from Alaska, and they were very helpful to us in many ways. Levi's a state trooper. He flies for the troopers. Some of you may remember that he crashed this plane. Another plane ran into his plane, and they came down from 1,650 feet and landed in the woods. And all he had was slight facial fractures and a cracked shoulder blade. He was back to work light duty in 6 weeks. I was able to see the plane. The state rebuilt that plane. And there it is. It's just in a hangar. It's a museum piece. Nobody flies it. But it's pretty amazing that he lived through that. They now live in Kodiak Island.
His helmet, the top of the plane went off, and his helmet was hitting the trees as he went down. It knocked him out. So he was grounded for 6 months because of that. But the helmet company wanted that helmet because they could really make a big deal on that. And he was able to meet the governor and stuff. They were really thankful that a trooper made it through. Because you would think that in Alaska, most trooper deaths would be because of bullets, but it's actually because of airplane crashes. So we're very grateful to the Lord that He spared his life.
Protected Levi. So just not all work, not all work and no play. I was able to do a caribou hunt with my son and son-in-law in the North Slope, and I had a dream of shooting a grizzly bear with my .280 Remington, and I was able to do that with Levi. Levi and I both put the first bullets through it at 15 yards. Okay, just popped out of up along a stream, and we were able to put that down, and he's now hanging on our wall. And so we wanted to say thank you, Victory Baptist Church, for your prayers, for your faithful giving, for always being faithful and encouraging through all of our transitions and places of ministry. Not all churches went with us from one place to the other, and so we want to thank you for that and for maintaining this place of worship. We're so thankful you have a new pastor. He's not strange to you, and we're just looking forward to hear how God continues to use him and his family and this church in the future. God bless you. Thank you.